In the IELTS speaking test, how would you answer the question, what is the public transport like in your town? It's a simple question, but many people quickly run out of things to say. This can stop you achieving the band score that you need. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a variety of suggestions for ways that you can expand your answer and achieve a higher score. Hi, my name's Vic, and this is episode 7 of the IELTS with Vic podcast. If you want a free copy of the podcast transcript, then head over to my IELTS blog to request it. The link is in the show notes. So, let's focus in on today's question. What is the public transport like in your town? The first thing that springs to mind for me is, which place should I talk about? I'm originally from a village, but these days I live in a city. Given that I have no up-to-date knowledge of the transport in my village, it would definitely be easier for me to talk about the place where I currently live. So in the exam, that's what I would do. I've noticed that with many students, the first time they answer a new question, they often waste valuable speaking time whilst thinking and trying to decide what to talk about. For me, the wasted time would be me sitting and choosing whether to talk about my village or the city where I now live. However, once we've answered a new question the first time, it may feel easier to talk about it the second time because we already decided what to talk about. My tip for you then, especially if you have lived in several places, is to decide now which place you are going to think about as your town or your city, to save you valuable time in the exam. A useful phrase for the exam is, I grew up in X, but now I live in Y, so I'm going to talk about Y. For example, I grew up in London, but now I live in Bristol, so I'm going to talk about Bristol. You don't have to start your answer like this, but personally, I like to make it clear to the other person which place I'm going to talk about, as many people find context helpful in following the flow of speech. The next logical thing to do is to mention the types of public transport that exist in your town or city. Making sure to signpost this with really clear nouns will help to increase both your lexical resource and task achievement score. Personally, I think a good starting point is a list of the different types of public transport, such as buses, the subway, metro or underground, trains, coaches, trams, or minivans. It really depends where you live as to what the options will be, but a good place to start is to list the options. So, for example, where I currently live, the most popular form of public transport seems to be buses, and there are also local trains and a tram system. The city has several train stations with national links too, and a coach station with nationwide services. Unfortunately, there is no subway in my city, but the tram is a convenient alternative. That list contains some nice concrete nouns related to the public transport in my city, so it's a good start. However, we definitely need to expand this answer to achieve a higher score. It's important at this point to focus in on the wording of the question. As a reminder, the question today is, what is the public transport like in your town? This question follows the pattern of, what is something like? When we ask, what is something like, we are asking you to tell us about that thing, to describe it, or perhaps give your opinion about it. So to answer this question fully, I need to do more than just list the transport options. Given that we're talking about public transport, Some of the aspects we could include might be the convenience of the schedules, the affordability, the cleanliness and safety. You could choose to talk from a more distanced or objective viewpoint, or you could talk about your own personal experiences of the public transport. Let's review some phrases for each, along with some of my personal examples. Regarding convenience, we can talk about the transport being convenient if there are frequent or regular services, so that you don't have to wait too long for the next train or bus. Also, you probably want the service to run at convenient times of day. For example, if you commute to work, you will want services that start early enough to get you to work on time and finish late enough for you to get home afterwards. The length of the journey and factors such as traffic jams might also be relevant to some of you, depending on where you live. For example, I currently use the local trains in my city because I can get into the city centre in 10 minutes, whereas taking the bus would take between 40 and 60 minutes, depending upon traffic. The trains don't leave as often as the buses, but overall, the journey time is still shorter on the train. And because they run between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m, they are quite convenient for my needs. Let's move on to the topic of affordability then. If you're looking to save money, you'll probably prefer the cheap, discount or budget option. With public transport, there are various saver tickets and local schemes that have lower prices than paying for single fares. This very much depends on where you live. However, if the cheaper option is lower in quality or convenience, you might prefer to pay more for a better service. For example, the cheapest option for me right now would be to take the bus, but the local buses are really slow and crowded, so I prefer to use the train. The train doesn't cost that much more, but it is way better than taking the bus. Currently, I pay for a monthly train ticket, which covers specific zones of the city, and I have unlimited travel within these zones while the ticket is valid. It's a great system and a good way to save money. Let's move on to cleanliness next, as I personally feel that this is a very relevant topic when discussing public transport. Perhaps the public transport in your city is new, clean and hygienic, or perhaps it's old, dirty and unhygienic. Having lived in many places and travelled fairly extensively, I feel like I could write a book about my varied experiences of using public transport. To give an example, majority of the public transport in my current city is fairly grotty, to be honest. The buses are generally quite dirty and often a bit smelly. The trains are slightly better and seem to be a bit newer and cleaner. The cleanest and tidiest local transport seems to be the trams. The buses are definitely the worst. The final point for today is safety, as this is an important aspect for lots of people. We can think about the safety of the actual form of transportation itself, but also our personal safety as a person using that communal space. For example, I think the buses in my city are probably safe vehicles, and the drivers seem to drive quite safely. However, I don't feel very safe using the buses. There are often people who behave in worrying ways, sometimes being quite loud and aggressive with other passengers. So personally, I don't feel safe using buses in my city, especially at night. I feel much safer on the train as there are generally guards and security staff around. So, we've now considered affordability, convenience, cleanliness and safety from quite a personal point of view using my examples. However, you might prefer to take a more distanced or objective perspective. So let's think about some useful phrases for giving a slightly more distanced description of the public transport in your city without using the word I. Regarding affordability, local people have many options, but it seems that the buses are generally cheaper than both the subway and trains. However, the subway is absolutely the most convenient option in my city, as the network covers all areas of the city and runs around 20 hours per day, 365 days a year. There is a noticeable difference in the quality and cleanliness of the services offered locally. The subway is modern and clean, but the trains and buses are much older and showing signs of disrepair. Safety is a key issue for people taking buses in my city, as there is little security on the bus network. Subway stations have both cameras and security staff and are definitely the safest option for getting around the city. It's totally up to you whether you take a more distanced tone or give a more personal perspective on things. I would say to choose whichever feels most natural to you. To summarise then, you could begin your answer by clarifying which place you're talking about and stating clearly what type of transport exists there. You could then develop your answer by talking about aspects such as affordability, convenience, cleanliness, and safety. As usual, don't feel that you have to try and include all of those aspects. These are just some suggestions to give you ideas for building your own unique answer. Now that we're coming to the end of this episode, I highly recommend taking a few minutes to create your own expanded answer to the question, what is the public transport like in your town? If you would like some feedback, go ahead and use the comments section to tell us about the transport in your town. Thanks for joining me today, and don't forget, if you want a free copy of the podcast transcript, then head over to my IELTS blog and fill in the form. See you next episode for more phrases and tips to level up your IELTS speaking test score and achieve your English learning goals. Thanks for listening and have a great day.